In 1958, when I was 6, Mao launched his Great Leap Forward. Mao's dream, after he took power in China, was to turn the country into a military superpower so he could be the boss of the world. To fulfill this dream, Mao bought huge quantities of arms industries, and particularly the atomic bomb technology and equipment, and technology and equipment to make the missiles. But how was he going to pay for these extremely expensive purchases? Mao's answer was food. So he exported the food in huge quantities to Russia and some to Eastern Europe to pay for his military industries. And Mao knew his people were dependent on this food for survival. China was not able to produce enough food to feed its population and had been a food importer for the past 100 years. And now suddenly all this food was going abroad. And Mao knew tens of millions of people would die of starvation. He said to his top echelon, educate the peasants to eat less, having only tree leaves to eat. And he said that for all his projects to take off, half of China may well have to die. So in the 4 years of the Great Leap, between 1958 and 1961, nearly 40 million people died of starvation and overwork. My father was one of the few who stood up to Mao and protested against the Cultural Revolution. As a result, he was arrested, tortured, driven insane. He was exiled to a camp and eventually died very tragically, prematurely. My mother was under tremendous pressure to denounce my father. She refused. As a result, she was put over 100 those ghastly denunciation meetings, which were an everyday feature in China. Basically, the victims would be stood on the stage, and their arms would be ferociously twisted to the back, and their heads ferociously pushed down, and they would be beaten and kicked, and some beaten to death. My mother was made to kneel on broken glass. She was paraded in the streets where children spat at her and threw stones at her. She was exiled to a camp, but luckily she survived. Today, she still lives in China. My family was scattered, and I was exiled to the edge of the Himalayas and worked for 3 years as a peasant and as a barefoot doctor. A barefoot doctor was a doctor without any training, because Mao said, the more books you read, the more stupid you become, and which became the guideline for culture, for education and health. And so I was trying to treat the patients without any training, and of course they all wisely steered well clear of me. And then in 1971, I was able to get into a factory and worked as a steel worker and then an electrician. Again, there was no training, so I had 5 electric shocks in 1 month. In 1973, universities began to reopen. You know, from 1966, for 7 years, universities and schools were closed in China. Books were burned, museums were closed, theaters and cinemas were turned into torture chambers. You know, my mother was imprisoned in the cinema. And China became a cultural desert.